Alright, so everyone seems pretty fucking confused about this shit. So I decided I'm gonna research it, and I'm gonna report back to y'all in plain goddamn English. Hope this is helpful. If it's not, you can research it your own goddamn self.
Fight the good fight here at home.
Walking into battle with the Lord.
The Arab Spring started in early 2011. People all over the Arab world were like, yeah, fuck this old president, he's been in charge forever, let's get rid of him. And this was generally successful, with people being overthrown all over the place. However, in Syria this was a little bit different. Some people were like, fuck this old motherfucker, he's been in charge forever. But, like a lot of people, a lot of people, were like, this is alright, let's stick with this. But then the opposition was like, I think you should still go. And Assad, president of Syria, was like, I really don't think I'm going to. The protests continued, but then eventually in places like Dara, snipers started taking up posts. And depending on who you ask, it varies. You know, Israeli news, the Daily Mail, Lebanese and Syrian media all reported snipers really attacking policemen. While other media, like Al Jazeera, which is Qatar media, was like, yeah, that guy's totally shooting at protesters, and he definitely works for the government. This is generally disputed, and to this day is not settled, but some things are clear. What followed was a bunch of these peaceful protesters in homes getting raided by police. Of course, when I say peaceful protesters, I mean people with guns who were shooting at police. So from there, the violence kind of spiraled, with the opposition still saying, what if you step down anyway, and the government being like, we're still not doing that. And then rebels kept shooting police officers. And then the army was like, hey, don't shoot police officers. And then started shooting people for shooting police officers. And then the protesters started shooting the army for shooting them for shooting police officers. So then rebel brigades started forming all over the country, fighting openly with the army. That's how we are where we are today. Coincidentally, the rebels seem to change their ideas and demands according to whoever throws the most money at them. So frankly, for me to act like their ideas and convictions are the most important aspect of this equation would be pretty fucking dishonest. That being said, let's nosedive into the clusterfuck. Chronologically speaking, the first group to emerge that became a major force was the Free Syrian Army, which nowadays is sort of a phantom. It originally started as basically the leading force in the uprising. They were saying shit like, let's have freedom and democracy. The United States said, that's literally our catchphrase. The US gave them a bunch of shit. Then they were like, peace out, Girl Scout, and left. Western provided arms and clothing in hand to Nusra and ISIS. So now we have to ask the question, who are Nusra and ISIS? Nusra was a fighting force attached to Al-Qaeda. They are now called Fatah al-Sham. They basically want to set up an Islamic government that would look something like Saudi Arabia without all the money, aka a gigantic regressive shit show. ISIS wants to set up a caliphate, which is basically like theocratic fascism, which is the only singular way you could make theocratic monarchy sound groovy. The uniting factor in these two groups is that they both want to establish a theocratic shit show. It'd probably suck for anyone living there. Additionally, some observers that I like to call people who are in denial claim that another force exists that often gets unaccounted for. The force they claim exists is that of small, local neighborhood militias and committees that maintain rebel-held areas and are in fact secular. Which, frankly to me, sounds like a big fucking funny joke, because ISIS and Fatah al-Sham sort of have a murder boner for secularists, and they also sort of control every area these secular committees and militias are supposed to operate. So again, I ask the question, who are the rebels? Unless we're going to believe in secular democratic unicorns, we should come to the obvious conclusion that the opposition is mostly dominated by some pretty bad dudes who want to do some pretty bad, unfun shit. As is tradition, the US is involved in this world conflict. The US doesn't like the Syrian government. Syrian government likes giving weapons and training to Palestinians. The Palestinians use to shoot Israeli soldiers. The USA and Israel are good buddies. Also, the US hates Iran because Iran is always really trying to stick it to the US. Syria and Iran are good buddies, and generally work together to try and stick it to the US. So the USA started giving things that aren't weapons to the opposition, like uniforms and medical supplies, which in turn freed up the opposition to focus on getting things that aren't uniforms and medic supplies. The US also sorta kinda trained some anti-ISIS rebels who mysteriously disappeared the last week of training and didn't fight ISIS, but went on to fight some This is Qatar and Saudi Arabia. They don't much like Syria because Syria is friends with Iran, and Iran is always trying to get in their face. Iran is also always trying to prank the US with funny jokes, like funding insurgents who are fighting them, and Saudi Arabia relies on the US for regional power. Also, the Gulf monarchs have a lot of money, like buttloads of money. With buttloads of money, you can buy all kinds of things, like boats, big houses, land, or buttloads of weapons for buttloads of rebels, which they did. While the US and Gulf monarchs agree that they want Assad gone, they have some disagreements on who should do it. The US really kind of wants someone who isn't Al-Qaeda leading the opposition, because the US and Al-Qaeda sort of have a history. It's also kind of hard to sell the opposition to the US public if to-be theocratic despots are leading it. On the other hand, Gulf monarchs see a lot of themselves in the wannabe theocratic despots, and have given ISIS and Al-Qaeda so much support that they've become the primary forces in the opposition. Iran and Syria both sort of occupy a similar geopolitical spot. That being, they're both Arab countries that would really super rather not be owned or beholden to the United States or any other Western power. Both often act as a payroll and logistical support for Palestinian resistance organizations, Hezbollah, and other anti-Western forces in the region. Iran is also Shia, which is a small part of why they have conflict with Saudi Arabia. Of course, again, the main reason is that they kind of think the Gulf monarchs are a bunch of fucking tools for liking the US so much. Which is why Syria and Iran get along so well, despite Syria being secular, because they both really feel like the West should get the hell out of the Arab world. As soon as the rebels started being violent, Iran was on scene with weapons and logistical support. Additionally, Iran likes to give money and support to Hezbollah. Hezbollah is a Lebanese Shia militia movement that is super anti-Israel on account of Israel invading Lebanon, and is super anti-US on account of the US being allied with Israel who invaded Lebanon. Hezbollah enjoys doing what it can to stick it to the US and to Israel, which in the region is generally one and the same. They are also aligned with Iran. Hezbollah also happens to really hate it when governments that have been supportive of them get overthrown. So, Hezbollah has been sending troops and providing logistical support for Syria against the rebels. The US and Gulf monarchs hate this for all the reasons you would expect, i.e., that they were really trying to get rid of that Assad guy, and Hezbollah is making that pretty hard.
Guess who's back?
Russia used to be a world power. Then communism stopped being a thing in Russia. And the economy, infrastructure, and law and order also coincidentally stopped being a thing in Russia at that same time. They're only just now recovering. Only now NATO is right on Russia's border, which makes Russia pretty nervous. So Russia needs allies. Allies like Assad. Specifically, allies like Assad that are Assad, and are also not getting overthrown by people aligned with people who are aligned with NATO. So Russia has been using its still decent military to bomb the rebels. The Gulf monarchs hate this, and are like, stop bombing our dudes, Russia. And the US hates it, but says, can you please not bomb our rebels? And Russia is like, those are both stupid things to ask of us. Or Syria likes this because Syria asked Russia very nicely if they can come and help them clear out the rebels. Iran likes this because Iran really hates it when the US does a thing, specifically when that thing is destabilizing one of their allies, and Russia is stopping the US from doing just that. Illusion. We can divide these international powers into two groups, those who are against Assad and those who are for him. Egan's group, however, seems to be unable to make up their mind about who to support. Turkey and the Gulf states keep giving money to Islamic extremists, and the US is like, can you not? But they do anyway. This is in contrast with the group supporting Assad who have a very clear message: let's not have Assad overthrown. Screw these guys trying to overthrow Assad. So what about the Syrian people? A NATO survey in 2013 concluded that Assad had the support of roughly 70% of the population. NATO fucking hates Assad. Also, when you ask people who just got done living under the rebels, they're always like, think fuck the government showed up. Those rebel guys are dicks. Also, Assad won an election in 2014 by a massive landslide. When asked to comment, the US said, yeah, duh, he fucking rigged the election. And then the contingent of international observers from various corners of the world were like, he totally fucking didn't rig the election. So to break it down, some rabble-rousers were like, Arab Spring? ? And then millions of Syrians were like, let's please just not. The NATO was like, let's ask again. And the Syrians were like, still with Assad, dude. But we can honestly conclude this war is less about the Syrian people and more about the larger politics at hand. The US is worried because it stands to lose a very symbolic victory if Assad stays in charge. Russia flexed on us, and if Russia gets their way, that means they're going to keep flexing on us, which will mean a substantial weakening of Saudi Arabia and Turkey's standing in the region. Hezbollah is also making some comments along the lines of like, hey Gulf states, I'm going to roll up in that mansion and whoop some ass after we were done here in Syria. This would also be the first time since like communism was scary that an Arab leader stood up to the West and won. I hope this video is helpful. Don't forget to like and subscribe.